All on you, Mr. Rain.
How's my hair look?
It's there. Some of it.
Hey guys, this is Pat, and this is Heidi from Rain Country, and this is a follow-up or a sister or akin to a couple of the videos that we've been putting up. Kind of relates a little bit, or actually quite a bit, to our preparedness videos, and also to our best places to homestead video. Information when it comes to buying land or thinking about relocating. There are several different factors. Of course, each individual is going to have their own reasons, but sometimes it's really convenient for us, or might be convenient for us, to write some of those things down and reevaluate why we're considering relocating. A lot of times our wants and our dreams kind of overtake reality a little bit and practicality. We had a lot of good feedback from our best places to homestead. We had people all over the country, we had people out of country even commenting on those videos, and people commenting back and forth. And I think it was a real fruitful video that we put out, and real advantageous comments that were put out by a lot of our viewers. A lot of good interaction there. I'm just going to go ahead and read off this list, and then we're going to go back and maybe take a look at some of these a little closer. You always hear in the real estate or investor realm, location, location, location. And that falls very true to the application of investing or relocating or just living out the way you want to live, whether it be you want to live in town, in the city, in the country. You have to ask yourself why. The first thing you probably need to really evaluate, in my opinion, like I say, this is just my opinion. Everybody's got their own, and they're welcome to it. And we invite you to comment in the section down below there of things that I might not be putting down here, and so others can actually get in there and say, oh yeah, I'll put this on my list as well. So going into this, I think you have to really kind of define. There's so many different things out there to define, and I think the biggest thing is well, what's my budget look like, and how much land do I really want? You may want just a 1/4 acre. You might want 500 acres. You know, what does your pocketbook look like in retrospect to that? And while you're considering that, you have to look at this list of questions, or a list of features and different things on this list here to consider when you're actually making those hard choices. So I'm just going to go ahead and start reading these off. Water availability, climate, natural resources, population density, predators and pests, topography, geology, cost of living, restrictions, surrounding industry, costs of relocating, the effects on the family, the skills that you're going to need, raw land versus developed. So those are the questions that you need to just, I think personally, you need to sit down and look at. And again, if you have anything to add to that list, I'm sure that there's more here. I just threw this thing together, and so we could come in here and talk about that, because I think it's a pretty important topic. I'm a water guy, so I think of water constantly. Again, you know, you have to kind of define what kind of person you are. We consider ourselves homesteader minded and prepper minded. folks. We like to have animals. We like doing things for ourselves. We like the idea of eventually going full-time off the grid as far as electricity and water. So water is a big thing for us. It's not as important to have the water is how do you treat it once you get it. Do you have good water? Do you have well water? Is your well water contaminated? Is your surface water contaminated? How are you going to treat that water? Can you hook up to a community well? Can you hook up to a municipality? Do you want to hook up to a municipality? So all those things you have to evaluate in your mind as to what you're willing to accept, what you're willing to give up. Do you have fracking in the area? Do you have a waste dump close by? Do you have a lot of farms that spray pesticides and different things like that that might contaminate the watershed or contaminate your water source?
Or even get overspray onto your own.
Correct.
Because some places, I know where I grew up, they used to spray pesticides on the orchards using planes.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. All those things you have to consider. So, and that all kind of ties into everything that we're talking about here. And so, water availability and the quality of water that you have. You might have back to a lot of these different things. You might find, okay, I'm going to get on a computer. I'm going to look up land in Cucamonga someplace, and I'm going to say, wow, that land is cheap. Well, there could be a reason why that land is cheap. It could be high desert. You might need a lot more acreage to, support a cow. You have, in certain areas you can have, you're going to need so much acreage and so much square feet, per head of cattle. So a drier climate is going to require you to have more acreage to raise livestock and such as that. The geography and the weather conditions all play into that. So like the next one I was going to talk about is climate. Again, what are you going to do with a piece of property? We live in a very moist climate. Some things grow, some things don't grow. Some things grow big here, some things don't grow at all because they drown. So you have to consider the climate. Climate brings a lot of different types of species of plants and animals. So when you're considering climate, if you don't like the cold, you need to stay out of Antarctica or some places in Alaska. If you care to grow crops and different things, most definitely you have to consider a climate and what are you going to do to adapt to those growth challenges that you're going to have. Like if you're going to have a heated greenhouse, it costs money to grow year round, and the cost of putting up a greenhouse. Whereas if you go into some of the southern states, growing seasons are longer. You can grow all year long in some places, but you're going to have to deal with some of the heat and some of the things that bite you.
Yeah.
I don't like snakes and I don't like red ants. Red ants is one of my phobias. Anyway, so natural resources follow into that as well. Natural resources are things like rock, the different strata of your land that you're purchasing is non-water bearing. So that ties back into the water source and being able to get water. Percolability of the soil might lend itself to very expensive waste systems that you'd have to install. Like pressure mound and partial fill sewer systems are going to cost you a lot more than a conventional system. And in my opinion, they don't work as well. But anyways, that's just my opinion. So natural resources, are you going to be going off grid? you're going to have to consider, okay, I'm going to need to get a way to heat my house, and typically a person who's going off grid is going to need things like you know, wood products to burn, trees and such. So you need to get wood, and if you're really wanting to do that, and you're going to be living in a high desert, well, firewood's going to be a little harder to get. So definitely consider the vegetation. Are you going to run around and try to get wild edibles to supplement your homestead or your lifestyle? You might want to consider vegetation in that list of potentials. Population density. Do you want to be alone, or do you want to be around other people? Some people can't handle being away from everybody, can't handle not hearing the sound of cars and different things. And so if you're wanting to get 40 acres someplace, well, you're going to be away from folks. So you're going to have to consider, well, I really don't want 40 acres because I want my neighbors close to me. Or if you're kind of like us, you want a little more elbow room. Population density, what I found out in my research is the more densely populated an area is, the more restrictive your permitting and whether or not you can do your own thing on that piece of property gets more intense. So population density and future growth of that area are very important things to consider when purchasing property. Going back to predators and pests, you might go to a place and say, hey, I really want this. So you go and buy it, and you find out that there are some critters around there that you really don't care for, and it makes your life totally miserable because you can't stand to be around them. If you don't like wildlife, you might not consider, being off grid or living on a big piece of property that has no neighbors, because, basically you're in the wildlife's yard. They're not in your yard, you're in their yard. So when they come around and steal all the apples off your apple tree and raid your garden, they're just going along about their own business. So you have to take all that stuff into account, not just putting in a garden, but you got to put it in a way to protect that garden and to shield it from predators. You might want to put in that garden. But if you buy a piece of property that's all on a rocky north slope, good luck with that. Because half the summer it might be shaded, or most of the summer. When you're purchasing property, consider the topography and whether or not you can do the things that you want to do on it. Obviously, if you're going to be purchasing a property and you're going to want to be keeping bees, or you want to be grow a garden and different things like that, you want to consider something with a southern facing slope, or a portion of that property. When you start developing that piece, then you're going to want to have a southern facing slope in order to accommodate a longer growing period during the day, more sunlight during the day, less shade. Plants like that light for that photosynthesis. So topography is a very important thing to consider. The drainage and different things. Does that ground perk? So when it rains, are you going to have, you might be able to buy 40 acres. Most of that property might be swamp. Gosh, yeah, it's got water frontage, but you can't do anything with it because it's just a big mosquito bed. So is it usable land? So the topography is something really important to look at. I touched on the costs of living. What does a gallon of milk cost? What's a gallon of gas cost? Your taxes and permitting fees. Out here where we live is out of sight.
There are worse places.
There are worse places, but this is one of the places on the winning list of places that are taxed pretty heavy. So those things you need to really think about. Goes right along with restrictions. You might be able to buy a piece of property cheap someplace, buy a dream place. It might have all the topography, all the natural resources that you want. It might have the good water, but if you can't build on it because some government official tells you, well, you can't build on it, then what do? Then you're stuck paying for a piece of property that's unusable for you. It might be okay to camp on it. You can't build a structure on it. Maybe you can't build roads on it. Do all that homework before you delve in and make that purchase. You got to consider the costs of relocating. So if we got a piece of property back east someplace, what's it going to cost for you to pick up yourself and whatever it is you're going to pack over there, your lifelong belongings? What's it going to cost to make that move from here to there? Buying a piece of property, that's just the half of it, I remember buying a dump truck and going to get it, and it cost me $1,000 before I got it home. So those things you really got to consider. I mean, we got a lot of junk. So do you sell it and rebuy it wherever you're going? You're not going to get what you paid for it, for sure. But would it be more beneficial to go ahead and sell everything you have, move to where you're going, and then buy again? Or would it be good just to buy a moving truck, a used moving truck, and make trips every now and then and just slowly move over? Some of those things, all those things there, you really got to consider in that thought process as well. Your family. Okay, so typically where you're at now, you're going to have family around. You're not going to want to leave them. But you have to make you have to define whether or not that's going to be a holding factor in you moving or not. So you have to consider, if you're moving away, far away from family, then you're not going to be able to visit them as much. You're not going to be available for them to come see you, and you can't help them out, or they can't help you out. You can meet friends wherever you go, but your family, that's a pretty tough one. That's a real big thing for us to consider when we're moving. And the last one there is raw land versus developed land. So you buy a piece of property, it's cheap, you've got permission to do whatever you want on it, you've got good water, you've got good natural resources, the topography's great and everything, but now you have to develop it. Or you may have bought a piece of property that's got a well on it or a road in, and maybe it's got a septic in it. All those development things that you have to procure and have to bring into the mix to make all this happen. You have to make that definition. Well, do I want a composting toilet, or do I want to put in a septic system? Do I want to put in a solar system, or can I hook up to the commercial electrical grid? All those things cost money, and so it's not just moving on a piece of property and throwing up a house and there you go. And I know most of you know that, but just the cost of doing business there, the cost of not just the move, but what do you have to do on that piece of property when you get there? And that's a whole nother different story, but just some things to think about, things that we've been thinking about all along. And this is actually the first time I've actually written this down, and that really helps me to focus on the things that we really want to tackle before we actually shell out the money for a piece of property. So, Mrs. Rain, usually you're the one that does the talking.
Yeah,
for
this
the
was
most part,
Patrick's video.
This
really.
is kind of my little brainchild. It's kind of been a dream for me for years to get a bigger piece of property. We've been doing great where we're at, but we just want to do a little bit more.
Well, it's not that I don't want more property, because I do. There's a lot going on right now where it's hard for me to even try to think about this stuff right now. Obviously, it's difficult for me to think of moving away from my kids, and you know, and I'm just really busy in trying to focus on putting videos together and doing skirt orders and keeping my Etsy store going. These things right now are all consuming, and then just the regular chores, taking care of the chickens and the dogs and the house and all this stuff. And so for me, it's just, and maybe it's not really fair to Mr. Rain, but I'm just kind of letting him do all that. But I think he's enjoying it. But while you were talking, one of the things I thought about, and I don't think you mentioned it, that's also considering where you move the mentality of the people that live in that area.
Right.
I know for me, I would certainly want to, you know, live in an area where people were around there are pretty like-minded. Like Danny and Wanda, for instance, where they're at, they're from what I understand, especially with the Lori family moving in there too, they're in that same area, same neighborhood. You know, they've got an area where they've got a lot of people around. They're like-minded and they can sort of depend on each other. And so, I mean, that's something that I would find desirable is, you know, I wouldn't want to, you know, maybe you find the perfect piece of property with all the things you want, but it would be difficult if all the people around you, you know, or that were anywhere near you were totally opposite in their way of thinking and had no desire to help out in any way if you needed it. I think that's a pretty serious thing to consider. And I mean, obviously we look at being self-sufficient and self-sustaining as much as possible, but in the grand scheme of things, nobody's truly an island. Nobody can truly be an island without going crazy. And you know, we are created to be social beings, and you know, we need to have like-minded people and friends around us. And so that as much as sometimes we feel like we want to pull away from society and not have anything to do with people, when it really comes down to it, we need each other. And so there's really no such thing. We toss these terms out about self-sufficiency, and it's just basically a guideline of what we're heading. Yeah, we want to be more self-sufficient, obviously, but in the grand scheme of things, no one really can truly be completely self-reliant. I don't believe so.
Well, I don't think God really intended us to be by ourselves forever. I think He designed us to be social folks, and whether that social group is large or small, social nonetheless. And so typically if you're looking for a city lot, you're going to find people who think city thoughts. If you're thinking about moving into country, you have country people that think country thoughts, and they're probably going to be more apt to be more in line with what you're thinking. And that's a real general statement, but I found that to be a little bit true.
Well, we live in such a remote, small town that you're going to actually find a lot of people out here that think similarly. You know, there's a lot of people out here that have farms and you know, yes, even in rain country, you know, and are doing the off-grid thing or at least doing the, you know, goats and rabbits and chickens and all these different kinds of things. But we're in a neighborhood, and though all of our neighbors are great, wonderful people, I don't think there's anyone in our neighborhood that does what we're doing. I mean, some may have a garden, some may have a couple of chickens. That's probably about the extent of it. It's not the serious, let's, you know, we're trying to get ourselves to be as least reliant on public power and water and all this kind of stuff as possible. You know, we're kind of unique here.
Just some real important things to share with you guys if you're considering relocating, and if you've already relocated to that dream place, or if you think of things that you know, me and Mrs. Rain, that sounds like it's right up our alley, and you got a neighbor that might be selling his place for Next to nothing.
$50.
Let us know and share with us your thoughts and add to the discussion. We really enjoyed the last one. So thanks for watching.
Take care.
Hey, God bless.